The disease, of course, is still in circulation. So I know some people very close to me who've had it in recent weeks, but perhaps not with the same sense of threat as before. But the passage I want to share with you today is from Ezekiel 3. And it describes the time after the Babylonian captivity. So the people of Israel have been pushed away from their homeland, taken out away from the Jerusalem temple, taken to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar has swept them up. And then another 50 or 60 years later, the politics have changed, and Cyrus, king of Persia, has thrown over the rule there and returns the people of Israel to their homeland. And they build a Jerusalem temple. That's where I want to pick up the narrative for you today. So, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments were stationed to praise the Lord with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, according to the directions of King David of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever toward Israel. And all the people responded with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord had been laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of families, old people who had seen the first house on its foundations, wept with a loud voice when they saw this house, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted so loudly that the sound was heard far away. The temple is restored, worship is restored in Jerusalem, and some shout for joy, but some weep. The ones who had seen the former temple. And you could wonder, well, why do they weep? And I think I've heard resonance of that in these months and years as we've come out of pandemic. Well, this isn't the way I remember it. This isn't the way it was. I remember the good days. I remember the glory days. I remember when it was like this and like that and like this. Turns out sometimes the glory days weren't as glorious as we might like to remember them. But still, here we are. And it's so easy to kind of fall back into that, to see the restoration of the temple, but still weep, because it isn't quite what we remember. I'm told that reverse culture shock can be the hardest sometimes. So for those people who've been overseas for a prolonged stay, maybe like, say, in the Peace Corps or in the military, and all this time have held this image in mind of home. And then when they come home, home turns out not to be home. Home isn't anything like this image that I've held in my mind for all this time. It's different. Things have changed. That building didn't used to be there. There used to be a building there. And those people who lived down the block, they've been gone for years. Is this my home? Is this what I remember? And yet, we are called to find God present. We are called to find God present in every place. And God will surprise us. Surprise, God will overtake us in our moments of uncertainty. And the God whom we knew before in a place will be the God whom we know now and in the future. But it requires a certain flexibility. It requires a certain openness of heart and spirit, because we can sing the Lord's in a new way, in a new song, in the old place. And that's the challenge, to sing a new song in the old place. Because that memory in our mind of the glory days, and what it was like, you're never going to see that again. That's in the river, and it's downstream. But you will see God. God shows up. And God embraces imperfection. Thank God. God embraces us in the midst of our imperfection, in the midst of our surprises, even the bad surprises. God's there for us. And so we can see that in the incarnation. We can see that in the kenosis the self-emptying of God is described in the lesson for today. That the Son didn't grasp at equality with God, but emptied himself and embraced our condition, our feeble human condition. So Jesus comes into the world not sharing all that omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence. If he's in Jerusalem, he's not in Nazareth, he's in one place or another. In other words, limited in ways that God isn't limited, voluntarily to share our lives. That God takes on a state of equality with us so that we may take on a state of equality with God. That's St. Athanasius. God becomes human, man, so that humanity may become God. Just that radical. God embraces our imperfection in the life that Jesus lives and shows us how it is possible for us to live in a holy way, whatever the circumstance, whatever the imperfections, whatever the surprises, good or bad, that we may face, that there's a way forward for us. There's healing and hope, inspiration, forgiveness, resurrection for us, even in the most trying and difficult and unexpected of circumstances. God shows up. And so the images of the relationship of God and the faithful, there are many, that's whatever, master, servant, it's one, shepherd and sheep, how you feel, but it seems to me maybe one of the most effective is rather when Jesus says, you are my friends. In other words, that he's taken on a state of equality with his friends. And they're no longer, just in some kind of vassal state or whatever, but he welcomes them as friends. For indeed, bridegroom and bride, that the lover takes on a state of equality with the beloved. I heard John McQuarrie say that in a sermon one time. The lover takes on a state of equality with the beloved. And for those in marriage or significant relationship, I urge that to you consistently. It's not like one's above and one's below, but rather we take on a state of equality with one another. And in that sharing, in that bridegroom-bride relationship, or that friend-to-friend relationship, that's where the glory shows up. That's where the grace shows up. That's where the hope shows up, enabling us to face all kinds of situations and all kinds of changes. And if we find ourselves saying, well, that's not the way I remember it, just remember that what you do have and what you do remember accurately is God with us in all our changes and all the different contexts and situations and threats. God with us.